28 Days Later. Danny Boyle's film from 2002 revolutionized zombie cinema by grounding the outbreak in viral science. The rage virus, a blood-borne pathogen that causes full symptoms within 10 to 20 seconds of exposure, creates immediate, terrifying threats. The virus originated at Cambridge Primate Research Center when animal rights activists freed infected chimpanzees, leading to an outbreak that completely collapsed British society within 28 days. Unlike traditional slow-moving zombies, the infected in 28 Days Later are fast, aggressive, and driven purely by rage, making escape nearly impossible. The film's realistic approach extends to its depiction of societal breakdown, showing empty streets, abandoned buildings, and the complete failure of government response. Made on an $8 million budget, 28 Days Later grossed $82.8 million worldwide, proving audiences craved intelligent horror grounded in plausible science. The film's documentary-style cinematography, shot using digital video in actual deserted London streets during early morning closures, adds visceral authenticity that makes the apocalypse feel disturbingly real. Its success spawned a franchise that includes 28 Weeks Later in 2007 and 28 Years Later in 2025, cementing its place as the gold standard for realistic zombie horror. The film's exploration of human nature under extreme stress, combined with its scientific credibility, makes it the most influential zombie film of the 21st century. Train to Busan. South Korea's pulse-pounding thriller from 2016 takes the zombie apocalypse and traps it inside a speeding train. Director Yeon Sang-ho's film follows fund manager Suk-woo and his daughter Suan as they board a train from Seoul to Busan, only to discover a zombie outbreak has begun. What makes this film remarkably realistic is its claustrophobic setting. Unlike most zombie films where characters can run in any direction, Train to Busan confines its survivors to a train car, forcing them into impossible decisions. The infection spreads with terrifying speed, transforming victims within seconds of being bitten, and the film never shies away from showing how quickly social order collapses. Passengers turn on each other, the infected overrun car after car, and the protagonist must navigate both the undead and the selfishness of fellow survivors. The film grossed $98.5 million worldwide on an $8.5 million budget, becoming the first Korean film of 2016 to break 10 million theatergoers. Its success lies in how it combines heart-pounding action with emotional depth, particularly in the relationship between Seok-woo and Suan. The zombie behavior is consistent and logical, following patterns that make sense within the film's universe. Most impressively, the film depicts complete governmental collapse within a single day, showing how rapidly infrastructure fails when faced with a fast-moving pandemic. Train to Busan proves you don't need elaborate setups or complex mythology to create realistic horror. Just put real people in an impossible situation and watch them fight to survive. World War Z. Brad Pitt's 2013 blockbuster takes a global approach to the zombie apocalypse that sets it apart from more localized horror films. Based on Max Brooks's novel, the film follows former UN investigator Jerry Lane as he travels the world trying to find the origin of a zombie outbreak that threatens to end humanity. The infection's speed makes it terrifyingly realistic. Victims transform within approximately 12 seconds of being bitten, creating exponential spread rates that overwhelm military responses. Unlike traditional zombie films, World War Z shows the apocalypse from an international perspective, depicting outbreaks in Philadelphia, Jerusalem, and South Korea, demonstrating how a pandemic would realistically spread across connected populations. The film's most harrowing sequence occurs in Jerusalem, where massive walls built to protect the city prove useless against the sheer numbers of infected, creating human pyramids to breach the defenses. This scene brilliantly illustrates how traditional fortifications fail against a threat that doesn't tire, doesn't think, and never stops coming. The film's production was notoriously troubled, with a budget that ballooned to approximately $190 million after extensive reshoots. But the final product works because it treats the outbreak seriously. It became the highest-grossing zombie film of all time, with over $540 million worldwide, proving audiences respond to zombie horror that acknowledges the global scope of a pandemic. The film's ending, set in a World Health Organization facility, grounds the narrative in real-world institutions, making the threat feel plausible rather than fantastic. Girl with Gifts. The 2016 British film takes a unique scientific approach to the zombie genre by basing its infection on Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, an actual parasitic fungus that zombifies ants in nature. Directed by Colm McCarthy and based on M.R. Carey's novel, with Carey adapting his own screenplay, the film explores what happens when a fungal infection evolves to target humans instead of insects. The infected, called hungries, aren't traditional zombies, but humans whose higher brain functions have been destroyed by the fungus, leaving only base instincts to hunt and feed. What makes the film remarkably realistic is its focus on a potential cure and the ethical implications of sacrificing infected children who retain some humanity to save the human race. The protagonist, Melanie, is a second-generation hungry, infected before birth but able to control her urges, representing an evolutionary adaptation that raises disturbing questions about humanity's future. The film's £4 million budget, half funded by BFI Film Fund and Creative England, created a grounded post-apocalyptic London that feels lived in rather than stylized. The film shows abandoned buildings overtaken by massive fungal blooms, a visual representation of how nature reclaims human spaces when society collapses. The military's protocols for handling the children, strapped to wheelchairs, handled with extreme caution, reflect realistic containment procedures for dangerous biological threats. The film received 86% on Rotten Tomatoes, and stands out for asking difficult questions about survival, humanity, and whether saving our species justifies any cost. Alive. South Korea's 2020 Netflix film presents one of the most relatable takes on the zombie apocalypse, by focusing on a single young man trapped in his apartment building as the world ends outside. Directed by Cho Il-hyung and starring Yoo Ah-in and Park Shin-hye, the film strips away action spectacle to explore the psychological horror of isolation during a pandemic, a theme that resonated powerfully given its release during the global health crisis. The protagonist, Oh Jun-woo, is a gamer who lives alone, and the film realistically depicts how quickly modern conveniences disappear when infrastructure fails. Within days, he loses internet, power, and running water, forcing him to ration food and find creative ways to survive. The film's genius lies in its use of technology to maintain human connection. Jun-woo communicates with another survivor across the street using drones, walkie-talkies, and improvised zip lines. This feels authentic to how modern people would actually behave during a crisis, using whatever tech remains functional. The film was based on 2019's script, Alone, by Hollywood screenwriter Matt Naylor, adapted by Cho to reflect Korean urban living, where many young people live in small apartments surrounded by neighbors they never meet. The film was released globally on Netflix on September 8, 2020, and within 2 days of release, it achieved global first place on the platform, becoming the first Korean film to top Netflix Movies Worldwide chart. Its success demonstrates audiences' hunger for zombie content that focuses on psychological survival rather than just physical threats. The film received 88% on Rotten Tomatoes, and succeeds because it understands that in a real apocalypse, loneliness and hopelessness might be more dangerous than the infected themselves. Dawn Remake. Zack Snyder's 2004 remake of George Romero's classic redefined zombie speed and ferocity for modern audiences. The directorial debut from Snyder, with screenplay by James Gunn, takes Romero's slow, shambling undead and transforms them into sprinting predators that can run down even the fastest humans. The film stars Sarah Polley, Ving Rhames, Jake Weber, and Mekhi Phifer as survivors who barricade themselves inside a shopping mall, creating a realistic scenario of ordinary people forced to work together despite vastly different backgrounds and personalities. What makes the remake work is its unflinching depiction of how quickly society would collapse if the dead suddenly returned to life with superhuman speed and strength. The opening sequence, where a quiet suburban morning descends into chaos within minutes, sets the tone for relentless horror grounded in domestic reality. The mall setting provides both resources and dangers. Survivors have access to food, weapons, and supplies, but the building's many entrances make it nearly impossible to fully secure. The film shows realistic conflicts emerging among survivors as resources dwindle and hope fades, with some advocating for staying put while others push to risk everything for a chance at rescue. Snyder's kinetic direction and gore effects make the violence feel visceral and consequential rather than cartoonish. The film grossed over $100 million worldwide and influenced countless zombie films that followed by establishing fast zombies as the new standard. Its nihilistic ending, where most survivors die in their escape attempt, reinforces that in a real apocalypse, happy endings are rare, and survival often comes down to luck as much as skill or preparation. By the way, if you're into this type of content, I make videos like this all the time. A subscription would really help me out. Pontypool. Canadian psychological horror from 2008 takes the most unique approach to zombie realism by making language itself the infection vector. Directed by Bruce MacDonald and written by Tony Burgess based on his 1995 novel, Pontypool Changes Everything, the film unfolds almost entirely within a radio station, where shock jock Grant Mazzy, played by Stephen McHattie, gradually realizes that certain words in the English language have become infected, turning speakers and listeners into violent, zombie-like creatures. This concept elevates the genre by suggesting that in our hyper-connected world, ideas and information spread faster than any biological pathogen. The film's single-location setting forces viewers to experience the apocalypse through audio descriptions and phone calls, creating a claustrophobic atmosphere where the true scope of the disaster remains ambiguous. This approach feels remarkably realistic to how most people would actually experience a crisis, through fragmented media reports and secondhand accounts rather than direct observation. The infected repeat words and phrases obsessively before becoming violent, a behavior that seems absurd until you consider how language shapes thought and consciousness. The film was inspired by Orson Welles' 1938 War of the Worlds broadcast, and like that infamous radio play, it demonstrates how media can create panic and uncertainty. The film was simultaneously produced as both a motion picture and radio play for BBC, emphasizing its focus on audio-driven horror. With 84% on Rotten Tomatoes, Pontypool succeeds because it understands that the most realistic zombie apocalypse might not come from a virus or radiation, but from the very systems we use to communicate and understand the world. Night Living Dead. George Romero's 1968 masterpiece created the zombie genre as we know it, and remains one of the most realistic depictions of apocalyptic social collapse ever filmed. Shot in black and white near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on a $114,000 budget, the film feels like documentary footage of a real crisis unfolding. Romero's genius was grounding supernatural horror in mundane reality. The zombies aren't explained by science, but the human response to them is entirely realistic. When the dead begin rising, authorities try to maintain order, but communication breaks down, conflicting reports spread panic, and eventually martial law fails to contain the threat. The film's protagonists, played by Dwayne Jones and Judith O'Dea, aren't action heroes, but ordinary people thrust into an impossible situation, making poor decisions under stress and turning on each other as fear escalates. The film's most shocking element wasn't its gore, but its nihilistic ending, where the hero survives the night only to be shot by a rescue posse that mistakes him for a zombie. This brutal conclusion reflects social tensions of 1968 America and suggests that human prejudice and violence pose greater threats than any monster. The film premiered on October 1st, 1968, and fundamentally changed horror cinema by demonstrating that supernatural premises work best when everything else is grounded in reality. Romero's approach influenced every zombie film that followed. Show the outbreak through the eyes of ordinary people, depict realistic infrastructure collapse, and explore how crisis reveals humanity's best and worst impulses. I Am Legend. Will Smith's 2007 post-apocalyptic thriller presents perhaps the most scientifically plausible zombie scenario by basing its infected on a mutated measles virus designed to cure cancer. Directed by Francis Lawrence, the film follows virologist Robert Neville as potentially the last healthy human in New York City, surrounded by infected people who have devolved into vampire-like creatures that hunt in packs and hide from sunlight. The film's strength lies in its depiction of isolation and Neville's daily routine. He broadcasts radio messages hoping for survivors, hunts deer through empty streets, and maintains strict protocols to avoid the infected. These details ground the horror in psychological realism, showing how a brilliant scientist would actually approach survival when everything he knew is gone. The infected, called Dark Seekers, exhibit behaviors that blend zombie and vampire mythology, but remain grounded in biological plausibility. They're photosensitive due to the virus's effect on their skin cells, they're stronger and faster due to heightened adrenaline and pain tolerance, and they maintain pack-hunting behaviors, showing retained intelligence. The film's emotional core comes from Neville's grief for his wife and daughter, who died during the evacuation, and his desperate hope that his research can lead to a cure. Smith's performance carries the film's long stretches without dialogue, conveying Neville's deteriorating mental state through body language and interactions with mannequins he's placed around the city. The film grossed $585 million worldwide, proving audiences respond to zombie horror that explores loneliness and purpose. Based on Richard Matheson's 1954 novel, previously adapted as The Last Man on Earth in 1964 and The Omega Man in 1971, this version updates the premise with modern virology and computer effects, while maintaining the source material's focus on what it means to remain human when humanity has essentially ended. The Cured. Irish director David Frayn's 2017 film explores territory most zombie movies ignore. What happens after the outbreak ends and society must reintegrate the infected who've been cured. Starring Elliot Page, Sam Keeley, and Tom Vaughan Lawler, the film takes place in post-apocalyptic Ireland, where 75% of infected have been successfully treated with a cure, but retain full memories of the atrocities they committed while infected. This premise creates realistic social tensions that feel more relevant than most zombie horror. How do you reintegrate people who killed and ate their families, even though they weren't in control? How do you maintain order when cured individuals face discrimination, can't find work, and are forced to live in segregated camps? The film's genius lies in treating the zombie outbreak as a metaphor for conditions that cause someone to harm others while not in their right mind. The cured must attend support groups, face victims' families, and navigate a society that fears and hates them despite their cure. Meanwhile, 25% of infected remain incurable, kept in detention facilities that increasingly resemble concentration camps. The film explores radicalization as some cured individuals join resistance movements, arguing they're being treated as second-class citizens. This feels disturbingly realistic to how society would actually respond to a crisis. Even after the immediate danger passes, fear and prejudice would persist. The 58% rating on Rotten Tomatoes reflects the film's uncomfortable subject matter. Unlike traditional zombie films that end when the outbreak is contained, The Cured asks harder questions about forgiveness, rehabilitation, and whether society can heal from trauma. Blood Quantum. Canadian director Jeff Barnaby's 2019 film introduces a unique premise that makes its zombie apocalypse feel culturally specific and realistic. Indigenous people are immune to the infection, while everyone else turns. Set on the Mi'kmaq Red Crow Reservation, the film explores historical themes through horror, suggesting that indigenous populations might outlast others during an apocalypse. The immunity isn't explained by science but treated as a given, forcing the film to explore realistic social implications. The reservation becomes a refuge for non-immune survivors seeking protection, creating tensions between those who want to help outsiders and those who question whether they should. This grounds the horror in contemporary politics, making the zombie outbreak explore power dynamics in reverse. The film depicts realistic conflicts emerging when immune indigenous people must decide whether to save the outsiders. Some characters advocate for compassion and solidarity, arguing that humanity should unite against the zombie threat. Others see the outbreak differently and reject any obligation. The film's violence is brutal and uncompromising, reflecting both zombie horror conventions and historical context. Blood Quantum succeeds as realistic horror because it acknowledges that apocalypses don't happen in vacuums. They unfold in contexts shaped by existing power structures and cultural identities. The film demonstrates that the most realistic zombie scenario might not involve finding a cure or escaping to safety, but navigating the complex human politics that survive even when civilization collapses. If this was worth your time, consider subscribing so you catch every new upload. Thanks for watching.